The FBI director says COVID probably leaked from a Chinese lab. A bipartisan U.S. government committee stands up to the CCP, and why China really wants peace in Ukraine. And more on this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode is sponsored by Surfshark. Whenever you go online, especially to look into so-called conspiracy theories, you should be using a VPN like Surfshark to cover your tracks and protect your identity. Welcome to the weirdest timeline, where baseless conspiracy theories sometimes turn out to have been right all along. Because this week, FBI Director Christopher Wray told Fox News that the COVID pandemic most likely originated from a Chinese lab. It comes shortly after the U.S. Energy Department said basically the same thing. Here's what Christopher Wray said.
There's this Department of Energy study that says it's likely to have come from a lab leak, although the confidence is low. It cites the FBI. What is the determination by the FBI?
So, as you note, Brett, the FBI has for quite some time now assessed that the origins of the pandemic are most likely a potential lab incident in Wuhan.
Wray wouldn't reveal the details that led the FBI to that conclusion. He did say that the FBI has a team of virologists and other specialists who are focused on biological threats. That's why the FBI's evidence points to an accidental lab leak from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. That being said, he's not claiming COVID was a Chinese bioweapon or that it was spread intentionally. Merely that it most likely leaked from a lab.
I will just make the observation that the Chinese government, seems to me, has been doing its best to try to thwart and obfuscate the work here, the work that we're doing, the work that our U.S. government and close foreign partners are doing, and that's unfortunate for everybody.
Wow. In all my years on this channel, I've never heard a more perfect description of the Chinese government. If the Chinese Communist Party were a movie, that quote should be on the poster. It's especially unfortunate for all the people who had completely dismissed the lab leak theory as a baseless conspiracy theory. And no, I'm not just talking about the Chinese government, I'm talking about major U.S. media. For example, in a tweet from the end of 2020, which did not age well, NPR called the lab leak hypothesis a baseless conspiracy theory and said there is zero evidence for this. Scientists say the virus was transmitted to humans from another species. But as I've said, conspiracy theories sometimes turn out to have been right all along, especially when the theory was that a coronavirus leaked from a lab that was studying coronaviruses. It's not exactly a baseless theory. That's like saying, what do you mean the couch came from Bob's Discount Furniture? Don't be ridiculous. It was obviously given to us by bats or pangolins. So how confident is the FBI that COVID came from a Chinese lab? Moderately confident. Moderate confidence is a technical term. It means the FBI sees it as the most likely theory because the information is credible and plausible, but it acknowledges that there could be other ways to interpret the data. It's kind of like when a girl smiles at me at a bar. I'm moderately confident she's flirting, but there's a possibility she's actually laughing at a mustard stain on my tie. The Energy Department came to the same conclusion about COVID's origins, but with low confidence. Low confidence means that the information is scant or fragmented, and it's hard to draw a solid conclusion. But the Energy Department upgraded its stance from undecided because it now also sees the lab leak idea as the most plausible theory. The Energy Department oversees a system of laboratories across the U.S., some of which do research into virology. They have not found evidence that COVID was transmitted to humans from any specific animal or species. So yes, there's a lot of hedging, because in reality, no U.S. government agency knows for sure, but the Energy Department and the FBI each say an unintended lab leak is the most likely, and they arrived at those conclusions for different reasons. And they'll likely never be fully confident because the CCP doesn't exactly share evidence of their wrongdoing. They ditch it faster than girls at the bar ditch me when they see a mustard stain on my tie. I really need to stop eating hot dogs before club hopping. The Chinese government has never allowed an independent investigation into the origins of COVID. The Communist Party did allow a WHO team to visit the Wuhan lab more than a year after the outbreak, but the team was given little direct access to team members, and uniformed and plainclothes security guards stood watch. Their lab visit lasted only 3 hours. Gee, I wonder why they couldn't find any evidence of a lab leak. That'd be like police trying to solve the Nicole Brown Simpson murder case by showing up to the scene of the crime 13 months later and taking a quick look around and saying the killer must have been a bat or a pangolin. Meanwhile, my favorite Chinese state-run media, the Global Times, has jumped on these new lab leak revelations by publishing this rather confusing cartoon and accusing the U.S. of politicizing the origins of COVID-19. The Global Times says the U.S. is preparing political dirt bombs to attack China. As for the Energy Department's report, they responded, to be frank, low confidence basically means baseless, which, as I've explained, is not what low confidence means. It means the lab leak theory is still the most likely one, but there's incomplete evidence. I wonder if there's incomplete evidence because the Chinese government won't allow an independent investigation. Must be nice not letting anyone investigate your crimes. I asked if I could investigate the screams coming from his house, but he told me to stop politicizing it. There's nothing else I could do. China's new foreign ministry spokesperson Mao Ning said this week that China resolutely opposes any form of political manipulation about COVID's origins. And in a press briefing, she told reporters that it is the U.S. who should respond to the world's questions and concerns over Fort Detrick and its military and biological labs across the world. Yeah, America, don't politicize COVID by accusing China of the same thing we're accusing you of. This is the CCP's most pathetic projecting. Even more pathetic than projecting missiles near Taiwan to try and seem strong. The only type of folks that do this are ones who have low confidence. And after the break, a group of U.S. Congress members stands up to the CCP. Welcome back. Some good news. This week, the U.S. House of Representatives' new China Select Committee held a hearing about the threats the U.S. faces from the Chinese Communist Party. The 3-hour live event featured talks from Democratic and Republican members of Congress, plus testimony from former U.S. security officials and Chinese rights activists. Sadly, I wasn't invited. This is the biggest snub since Tommy Wiseau wasn't nominated for an Oscar. Everybody betray us! The hearing even had a couple of hecklers from the anti-war group Code Pink.
Your sign is upside down.
It's the biggest threat to this country and the world. We need to address that with China.
Anyway, the point of the committee is to counter CCP threats. Here's committee chairman, Republican Congressman Mike Gallagher.
The Select Committee will not allow the CCP to lull us into complacency or maneuver us into submission.
And here's ranking committee member, Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamurti.
We must practice bipartisanship and avoid anti-Chinese or Asian stereotyping at all costs. We must recognize that the CCP wants us to be fractious, partisan, and prejudiced. In fact, the CCP hopes for it. But what they don't get is that the diversity of our viewpoints and backgrounds is not a bug in America's operating system. It is our defining feature and strength.
Wow, that's actually really nice. Finally, something that can actually bring Americans together from both sides. So, how did the U.S. media report on this bipartisan teamwork? By highlighting the partisan divide. No. Did Politico not actually watch the hearing? They wrote that Republicans focused on Beijing as an existential threat, while Democrats pushed strengthening U.S. competitiveness. Yes, but having different perspectives on why America should stand up to the CCP is the committee's strength, not its weakness.
We must recognize that the CCP wants us to be fractious, partisan, and prejudiced.
Good job, mainstream media. That article is like when a kid does a book report on a book they never read. So, 1984 is a book about the year that saw the release of Ghostbusters, Gremlins, and The Terminator. The end. Speaking of the media, Reuters. It's a UK-based newswire service that reports from China, among other places. Apparently, some hackers pretended to be Reuters reporters and created fake social media accounts to approach Chinese activists. Man, who would pretend to be a real reporter just to try and push an agenda? You know, besides many of the actual staff at CNN and Fox News. These impersonators appear to have started last November and were seeking information about a group linked to protests against China's strict COVID-19 controls. Well, this past week, one of those activists they targeted caught on to the scam. It was Baidu Cao, a Chinese-Australian artist who we've had on our podcast, China Unscripted. And yes, we have a weekly podcast on a separate channel. Link is below. Everyone has a podcast these days, even churches. If you think about it, they're basically just live podcasts for Bible fans. Baidu Cao tweeted that he had been approached on Telegram by someone asking for information on a Chinese-language online platform called Citizens Daily that carries protest art. Who was behind the scam? We don't know, because after Baidu Cao exposed it, they deleted everything. But an administrator at Citizens Daily said they suspected Chinese state involvement. And given this is China we're talking about, I can say it was them with moderate confidence. Speaking of scams, a new report from the company CrowdStrike shows that China-linked groups are the most active cybersecurity threat to the U.S. The report says Chinese hackers have targeted 39 separate industries, so basically almost everyone. Maybe even the anime body pillow industry. Genocide, slavery, and torture are one thing, but if the CCP interrupts this supply chain, they've officially gone too far.
The spy balloon was interesting, but this cybersecurity threat from China is far more pervasive, far more persistent, and in the long term, I think potentially far more lethal, and it's the bigger threat for sure.
He goes on to say China has been collecting vast amounts of valid personal and corporate credentials. Their hackers use these to access networks, so a lot of these attacks go unnoticed. It's like stealing someone's documents from a car, not by smashing the car window, but by borrowing their key fob and just unlocking the door.
Using these kinds of credentials without using any kind of malware or something that traditional defense would detect is incredibly effective.
At this point, it's probably just safe to assume that China is watching everything you do. Kind of like the character in that book, 1984. You know, Skynet from the Terminator. And after the break, the Chinese military is doing a lot worse than just hacking. Welcome back. The Chinese military is once again threatening Taiwan. On Wednesday, they sent 25 Chinese planes and 3 warships towards the island. 19 of those Chinese planes crossed into Taiwan's air defense identification zone, which meant Taiwan had to scramble its own fighter jets in response. The Chinese People's Liberation Army has been doing this kind of thing constantly. It's called gray zone warfare. It's aggressive and threatening, but not quite enough to trigger an actual war. And it really wears out the Taiwanese military. In response to years of China's increasing threats, the U.S. has stepped in to help Taiwan by selling them billions of dollars of weapons and now by deploying more than 100 troops to the island. I have an entire episode about that coming out tomorrow, so stay tuned. Essentially, China is now directly in the middle of their mess around and find out plan. Speaking of militaries, South Africa joined Russia and China for military training on the anniversary of the Ukraine invasion. The optics of this are not good. I mean, the optics are great for Russia and China. It shows they have an ally, and a really important one too. South Africa is part of BRICS, an informal group of fast-growing economies that a lot of investors keep wanting to throw money at, including the dictatorships. But the optics are bad for South Africa to host 10 days of naval drills with 2 authoritarian countries that are, or about to, invade their neighbors. So South Africa is basically doing that thing where they say, look, I understand why you all hate them, but they've always been cool to me. And yet, backing out of the joint naval exercises would have been an insult to Russia, but likely also to China, a far more important economic partner. So really, South Africa is in a tough spot. Once they joined China's Belt and Road Initiative in 2015 and started taking Chinese money, it became harder and harder to stand up for what's morally right in the face of what looks so good. Oh, so that's how they've been so cool to you. But Just because the Chinese Communist Party is constantly threatening Taiwan and doing joint military drills with Russia doesn't mean the CCP wants war. In fact, the CCP wants peace. According to China's Foreign Ministry spokeswoman on the Ukraine issue, China's position has been objective and fair and has actively promoted peace talks. China's advice to Russia on Ukraine is essentially, do as I say, not as I really want to do. In late February, China released a 12-point peace plan for the Russia-Ukraine war. Of course, if you've been watching China Uncensored for a while, you know something fishy is going on here. But it's not that China is lying about wanting peace when it really doesn't. No, China actually does want peace. But if you read their actual peace plan, you'll quickly realize that they don't actually have a specific plan for how to get Ukraine and Russia to make peace. Instead, the Chinese Communist Party merely suggests that peace talks ought to resume and that they would be happy to play a constructive role because it wants other countries to have to rely on China. But China does have specific suggestions for things that are way more important than peace. Like point number 9, facilitating grain exports. Number 10, stopping unilateral sanctions. And number 11, keeping industrial and supply chains stable. Those things are all about keeping China's economy afloat. And in the end, when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, isn't China's well-being what's really important? Because it turns out the only piece China cares about is a piece of those profits. And this episode is sponsored by Surfshark. When you go online, everything you do is being tracked and logged by the websites you visit and your internet service provider, and in many cases, by your government, which you definitely don't want if you're doing online research into controversial topics like the origins of COVID-19. Remember, you once would have been labeled a conspiracy theorist for talking about a lab leak, and now the director of the FBI is saying it, which is why he should use Surfshark too. The point is, no matter where you live or what you do online, you should always be keeping your internet activity private with a VPN. Surfshark even keeps a server in the British Virgin Islands. You can use that for maximum privacy because the laws there allow Surfshark to not keep any user data logs. So check out Surfshark. With just one Surfshark account, you can connect as many devices as you want. Try it out now. Surfshark has a special deal that includes 83% off a 2-year plan, plus 3 extra months for free. You can protect yourself for just $2.21 a month. So go to surfshark.com/uncensored and use the code UNCENSORED to secure this deal. The link is in the description below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.